Welcome all to Tabletop Tacticians. My name is Jinx, and this is a podcast we're hosting. I haven't done one of these in a long time, and so today is my privilege to host on board today the creators of a brand new game on the market. Actually, it hasn't not all that brand new. It's been around for a little bit, but these two characters here, Moose Cow and Madman. So welcome both of you guys. It's a pleasure to talk to you guys today.
Glad to be here, Jinx.
Thanks for having us.
Right on. Yeah. This is our second attempt. So some of the things that we're going to talk about we already covered. So we'll still try to cover them all. First attempt, just because of internet stability issues, we had a little bit of handicap. So do you guys want to give like a little intro to your game, what it's all about?
Basically, it's a in a nutshell, it's a expanded version of 1914, correcting a lot of issues with that game. As many people know, 1914, rather than getting a second edition that it badly needed, it just went out of print, and it's thankfully getting reissued, I believe, in August at least.
Right, a reprint, yeah.
A reprint, yeah. But and they're like adding a few more chips, adding a few more German soldiers and a couple more British soldiers, but otherwise it's the same thing. And I think they're updating the errata into the book, which is good. But it's still not the 1914 it should be, So, but Madman and I have been working on this for a few years now. This modded version of it, right. And that kind of stemmed from after us playing BBR. We decided to kind of like, essentially make the bloodbath rule set essentially like, what would that be for 1914, or what would we make it be for 1914? And the whole idea of having a turn limit, or not turn limit, round limit. And having like what could like a new idea of having different victory points and so on and so forth, because the original 1914 it isn't that, it just slogs for eternity essentially. But it was just basically like, how could we make a 1914 playable in a day but not be the hyper way too fast version with the tournament rule set, which I've never been a fan of. I thought the tournament rules, it's too quick, and in a way, there's problems with the map, with the original 1914 map. The biggest problem being Constantinople and how the Turkish Straits are treated, which there's no the allies can go through there no problem,
that's a big feature.
No sense whatsoever. The border of Bulgaria is incorrect, etc. And otherwise, I like the original 1914 map, but it had like the aesthetics of it. I like it, but there was a lot of issues with it that are either historical or gameplay purposes, etc., etc. And once we got the ball rolling on this, me being kind of the brain, Madman being the tools and the DNA, and he's been able to make my dream come true essentially, and we've just been able to put our brains together and come up with this version that's really cool. And we added a lot of things to it, and it also was like, there was influence from Lion in the Trenches version 2. He was the first person, I think, to do to take it upon himself to make a global version of it, and then after that other people kind of snowballed with their ideas and such, but a lot of them just never seemed to like do it in a way that I liked 100%. And I kind of explained this in our designer's note in our manual, but sometimes you just got to do it yourself. To get the game that you want, you got to do it yourself. And that's basically what we've done. I've put a ton of research into this. We've added national objectives, which the original didn't have either. We've added a whole new field technology system, which was like was an old idea of mine, which was like, how do we do research and development, but we do it differently. It's similar to previous versions in one aspect, but it's also like a whole new like concept that I haven't seen anybody else do with technology, how to change technology. So how do we field technology, just as a nutshell version, field technology influences territories on the board. It's not a superpower for a power like across the board, and it gives a new spin on it. And it's I don't know, it's once we actually played it once we tried it out with field technology, everyone agreed, everyone loved it, everyone had a blast with it. So yeah, we just have that, and just 1914, a little more better. Just the 1914 on steroids, but without too many steroids, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think a good way
How else would you describe it, Madman?
yeah, I think a good way to put it was we're not adding necessarily more complexity, we're just adding more, if that makes sense. So it's like
Yeah.
it's just a deeper, richer game overall, and it's the whole map, it's the whole world. And bringing in, let's say, the Empire of Japan and China. And I think overall, one of the most dynamic things we brought to this version was the victory point system, which, if you're familiar with BBR, they have a victory point system, but only the Axis are going after the victory points, and the Allies are trying to stop them, which to me has always felt sort of passive. If you're the Allied player, you're just kind of waiting around, building up, and then to steal the points at the end. And with this, both sides are fighting for the same points. And it makes it such a much more dynamic and fun game because you have your income tracker, but you also have, it's a victory point tracker. It's 2 and 1, and at the top of every round, the score is changing a lot, and it's just really interesting to follow the score, because me and Moose Cows have had 2 YouTube games so far of Kings and Kaisers, and you'll see like the score just like goes up and down, and it's just it's really exciting, and it's just like okay, well, which points do we go for? Oh, the team taking this one from me, and I'm going to take this one from them, and it's a less passive game. And
you have to hold them too. Like if something's contested, then you don't have the point anymore.
Sure. Yeah. No, that sounds really interesting. So it sounds like I'm impressed by your guys' capability of taking a game from just an idea to actually taking it to completion, because most board gamers are kind of dabblers in the industry, right? Like modifications here and expansions here and play around a little bit. But you guys not only started with an idea, but carried out to like a beautiful finish, in some sense, a beautiful map, a rule book, laid out everything all nicely. So the fact that you guys crossed the finish line with it, that's huge on your end of things. So congratulations, guys, on a job well done in that regards. So are you guys, so your history with Axis and Allies, did you used to play back in the day, or were you guys fairly new onto the scene, or what's that kind of all about?
Yes. I grew up playing Axis and Allies, like the original Classic, the original Europe, original Pacific. Very heavily when I was a kid, and in junior high, I had a really cool social studies teacher, and he would let me and my other nerdy friends stay after school. And originally it was Risk Club, and then I think I was the one that said, let's do Axis and Allies, and then and then it just turned into Axis and Allies Club. And then it was like people got junior high school, 7th, 8th grade, they had the time, they would come in early in the morning to cram in like a 45 minutes of play before going to class.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
Picking up afterwards. But then after like high school, go off to college, etc., interests change, but also, going to college, like, absolutely just didn't have the time for it. Kind of fell by the wayside. Every once in a while I would look up like, oh, what happened with the series? And like, all these new games came out. They're out of print. And then when Anniversary, post graduation and so forth, having more board game friends, getting back into board gaming, then Anniversary got reissued, and that was what was like kind of the shot of the arm, like, oh, okay, I'm gonna get back into this, And I thankfully, I had been interested about 1914, but I saw the comments saying that it needed a second edition, so I was like, oh, I'll just wait, because I was like, I've always found World War I to be fascinating.
Right, that's what I was going to ask you guys about. So are you guys? This is a period of history that you find quite interesting, 1914. Like most guys go into like World War II history or whatever it is, but you guys have a fascination for the Great War.
World War II is great. It's very interesting, but in terms of like, especially in America, I think the whole like the World War II movies, games, etc., it's really oversaturated, and because of our overall, limited involvement in World War I, it kind of gets swept by the wayside a lot. Like I remember, like one time I was a kid in the 7th, 8th grade class, and I asked my teacher, we were learning about World War I for the first time, right? So I asked my teacher, because all the textbooks, they say Austria-Hungary, Germany, and that's about it. And they only focus on Germany after that. And I asked my teacher, like, well, why did the Ottoman Empire get involved in the war? And he didn't really have a good answer for me. He just kind of gave me a guess, like, oh, Germany probably made them promises of more land or whatever, which is partially true, but very glossed over explanation. And then especially when I found out, oh, Bulgaria joined in too with them, and well, how do they get involved? And, nobody had an answer for that. So yeah, I kind of had to like find out a lot of information on my own. And so like a few years ago, I watched Indy Nidell's Great War series on YouTube. Watched the whole thing, and a lot of that was what also kind of gave me ideas for this game.
Cool. Yeah.
And it just kind of grew from there. But yeah, I've always been interested in World War One because I feel like I'm also really into horror movies, and I feel like World War One really is like that's a horror movie. Is
Sure.
being stuck in the trenches.
Sure. Yeah.
Gas. Have you ever seen Paths of Glory? And it's like you better charge, otherwise you're gonna get executed for disobeying orders. Stuff like that. So it's the idea of being there is terrifying. Just so much mass bloodshed. You see those photos of no man's land and just skeletons. It's just it's horrifying.
What about you, Madman? Did you enjoy this period of history as well for World War One over World War Two or something?
I didn't know as much coming into it, and it was the initial research which was really fun to get into, and I'm actually doing something similar like that right now with the Napoleonic Wars. I'm sort of jumping in, like I know the broad strokes, but I'm really going into it and diving deep, and that beginning process is so much fun. And also that period of history, it's sort of the modern era clashing with the old monarchy era, and it's it's realizing these new forms of warfare, and I just find that interesting as well. So it's very awkward, a very militarily awkward period of history in the beginnings of World War One.
The elderly military coming to terms with new technology and just not being able to grasp it.
I really enjoy World War One history as well. I find it was like you said, terrifying scene from the ground, but also at the start of it was like the French were like, esprit de corps, that's how we're going to win this one. It's just not really what kind of weapons we have or how much cannon we have, but it's the spirit in which we conduct this fight. And so mass casualties right at the start, right? And then the pickle hubs and all this other stuff, and then the rudimentary tanks showing up and stuff like that. It's like you didn't really know what to expect the next in this war. Chlorine gas, fighter, airplanes flying high up in the sky, Zeppelins. That's one of the reasons I like that game. I don't have it here, but Scythe, if you're familiar with it, we talked about this last time a little bit too, but this idea of like these battle machines walking across the battlefield. The reason I like that game is I don't enjoy playing the game, but artistically it's a lot of fun because it really, for me, imbibes that feeling of like, you don't know what's next in this war. Like, are we going to see some battle machines walking across or some newfangled something or other? That sense of like awe and wonder at this war, because you never know what's going to come clanking across the battlefield next. Like mines that would explode and take out like half, kilometers wide of trenches. Just insane. Yeah. So it's interesting period of history. Yeah. So getting into Axis and Allies specifically, 1914. So I think it always gets a bit of a bad rap in some of the community. I think it's because people don't understand it as much. What made you guys decide to build upon Axis and Allies 1914? Was there something to redeem off of this game as opposed to starting a brand new version instead?
Man, you want to answer this one?
Sure. I feel like Moose Cow got to that pretty much in the beginning, where it's such a great game. It's like, I feel like with 1914, so you either love it or you hate it, and it has such a cult following.
Sure.
But it also, even the people that love it know how broken it can be. And Moose Cow first introduced me to the game years ago, and I loved it. And our first game went 21 rounds, which that's insane. We just had like 15 battleships going at 20 battleships. Just insane stuff happening.
No, that's really cool. No, I'm glad you guys are taking a crack at making not taking a crack at, but completely making a game. I'm really excited to have a game at it with you guys as well, doing a YouTube where I think that'll be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to it. So what made you decide where to stop in this regards to developing the game? Because you've introduced different units onto the board, technology, you've got Zeppelins now. What made you decide not to go as far as, let's say, stormtroopers or different kinds of artillery and all this other kinds of stuff?
Sure. I have a little bit of an answer prep for that. In the back of our manual, we have a frequently asked questions thing that I just kind of threw together. And this was one question that I had prepped, but we didn't include it because we just didn't have the space for it. But to kind of just elaborate on it in general, we definitely I felt like we had to add cavalry, because cavalry was such a huge part of World War One. We had to add Zeppelins, or at least not for the core game, but for the expanded units. We have some expanded units that you can optionally play with.
Sure.
I highly recommend playing with Zeppelins at least. But it's also just weird as like you made a World War One game and you don't add zeppelins. Like zeppelins should be added. So in
Sure.
our game, Germany can have a maximum of 2 zeppelins, and that's it. Nobody else has, but they have enough. They can make it enough of a pretty solid impact on the game. Bombers can also be introduced by every power as well. But in terms of like adding, just let me pull up the question again. In terms of like stormtroopers, armored cars, siege guns, heavy tanks, armored trains, destroyers, pre-dreadnoughts. We changed battleships to dreadnoughts terminology. It's essentially the same unit, but pre-dreadnoughts, dreadnoughts having 2 different types for whatever reason. Prototype carriers, etc. We basically felt that sticking with a more simplified approach made the most sense in a game with a limited number of rounds, and by also not expanding extra units, we essentially combined them. So we to also save people on having to get more units, right?
Sure.
So we essentially combined cruisers with destroyers with our rules that we made for them. That was cruisers. You can select cruisers to detect subs to prevent their first strike capability, and that was Madman's idea, which I think we both love it. It's great. But that saves on number of game pieces players would need to acquire, especially if they get 1914. If they get a 1914 pieces, then they don't have to get more. They don't have to go buy more and more pieces. Like we get the pieces that make sense, that the most sense to add, basically. And we won't rule out the possibility of adding elements of these or whatever in the future, but we didn't want to make them mandatory. So it's like have the base units that you need to have, and if you want to add extra stuff you can. And then also the more units you have, you basically, because we didn't want to drift from the 6-sided dice, and the more units you add, then you kind of have to go into 12-sided dice or 8-sided dice or 10-sided dice. You kind of have to go into that category. And if you want to do that, that's fine, that's great, but you're also making it, when you add more and more and more and you make it mandatory, then it kind of consequence of that is that it makes it more exclusive at the same time, because then it's more stuff that more people have to track down. And then it's like, how do you once you have too much and too many units at too many different values, it all kind of just ends up blending together a little bit too, so it's almost a little bit of a double-edged sword in that sense, I guess. So it had to be within expanding, but don't go overboard, because if you go overboard, you might lose people. That's the concern, I guess.
But that's good.
Sticking within the mechanics of the 6-sided dice within a way that makes sense, etc. I think I basically explained it, but that's
that's good. Yeah, it's good. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, the more unit varieties you have less less distinct or less distinct they can be, and the lines start to blur, and you're like, well, you have a light armor and a medium armor, and they kind of cross paths, and you'd have that in World War I. You had your whippet tanks that the British had that were supposed to be like, you're really fast, you run across the battlefield. I mean, run, they still move pretty slow, but then you have your heavier duty kind of tanks as well. And in theory, you could say, okay, these are the male tanks, these are the female tanks, and you could really make it complex, but the line starts to really blur about the uniqueness of each individual unit. One of the things I'm trying to figure out is some sort of equation, and I'm not good with this kind of stuff, but some sort of designer equation to be like, all right, so everything you add into the game, let's say you add something for flavor purposes, you adds complexity, but at a ratio like complexity, and then there's fun added there as well. So you add complexity or add flavor, it gets more complex but more fun, but the more complexity you have, then the less fun it is. And so it's like this weird equation that kind of I want to eventually try to write down, but it just probably won't work. But you get the idea. It's like you could have like 3 different types of cruisers or whatever it is, but the problem is, like, do you get enough value for that? And at a certain point, it's going to be a curve that you get diminishing returns on your investment of the other units and stuff too. So I mean, it's interesting to hear where you guys decide to draw that line. Having a look through your rule book, I've been reading through it. One of the key factors that is your selling point, and I don't know if there's more we could explore in this, is the limited time, like 10 turns or 12 turns if you play with a little extended version. That seems to be a highlight or one of the main features that you talk about the importance of this game. And that seems to be, I guess, as married men or men with partners and possibly kids. I know some of Madman, I know you have kids.
3 kids, yeah.
So I appreciate that from my end as well. A game you can sit down and finish at the end of the day. So
theoretically finish in the end of the day, but I mean, if need be, you could easily You could easily finish the game in a weekend and not be like, or like a day and a half or something like that. If you wanted to, have a break, you could certainly do that.
Yeah.
But if you knew the rules, you could definitely bang out a game in a day.
Yeah, I've been asked this. We were just at BBR St. Louis, the tournament 2 weekends ago, and I was asked the question, how does it relate to like an average game of BBR? Because there might be some BBR people listening.
Sure.
It's like maybe if you tack on another couple hours to a BBR game, I'd say that's a good Kings and Kaisers game. If you know what you're doing, if you've just started, the first couple rounds are gonna be a little clunky, just like any other game, but you get the hang of it pretty quick. It's a easy game to get the hang of,
Yeah,
and I think we should say too. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, and one thing I will say is that, just to throw this in there, is that no power's turn in Kings and Kaisers or 1914, no power's turn takes as long as Japan's does in 1940 or BBR or whatever. Like Japan's turn always takes, no fault to Japan, it's just Japan's a lot. Japan's turn always takes a long time, especially when you have combat movement and also non-combat movement. And that's one of the things I like about Kings, and one of the things I really like about 1914 is that all the movement happens at once. Granted, we added a finish air movement phase so that air units that have conducted combat can finish their movement, but that's it. And I really like that. It saves a lot of time.
Yeah, turns are overall pretty quick. They are. I'd say, Britain and Germany, which are kind of like the two captain spots on the Central Powers and the Allies, those are the ones that take the longest, just because they have pieces all over the board. They have, bigger navies. But after that, everybody goes pretty quick. I'd say maybe Russia after that is
right.
third longest. But would you agree, Musko?
Sorry, Russia?
Yeah. Taking long.
Yeah, Russia can be long. I would say definitely, like you said, definitely Britain, definitely Germany. Let's see. France is usually pretty quick because France is really straightforward. Japan's quick, Italy's quick, the Ottoman Empire, if they have to think, because the Ottoman Empire I see could take a little bit of time because you're the one who gets beat up the most a little bit in some of but we did make the Ottoman Empire kind of fun to play, actually.
Yeah, the original 1914, they are not very fun to play.
Right.
What BBR did for Italy, we did for the Ottomans.
Right. Well, I'm not familiar with BBR at all. I mean, next to nothing. I mean, perhaps just because of the proximity between your game and BBR in some sense. But one of the things that I think will be worthwhile stressing here for people who might be coming and watching this from a BBR perspective is that this 1914 map and the way it plays out, Axis 1914 and the Great War in general, the focus is not so much like in a World War II game where it's all about capturing territories and you see your progression through the map by how many roundels of captured territories that you have. In the 1914 map, it's more like, positional advantage if you're in a position where you can threaten more of your enemy territories, or if you're tying up some of their troops. But mostly, as far as I'm concerned, it's causing more damage to them than they're causing you. And that it's that war of attrition really kind of comes through. And I know that's not everybody's cup of tea, but I think it's worthwhile emphasizing to people that this is not Axis and Allies 1914 or BBR, and that's us 1940, and it's not BBR where you're going to rapidly see your forces transition across the map. It's going to be much more, the focus is not in territories, it's in the attrition over your enemy economically as well as unit wise as well. So I think that's worth knowing and approaching this game from that perspective, right? So definitely. So I wanted to talk to Madman here a little bit more, since he's the more graphic kind of organizer, but I see that I have a timer ticking down here for 8 minutes left over. So we can try to go for this, but just letting you guys know that eventually time will go, and then we could probably refresh. I know Madman also has to take off a little sooner. So looking at the graphical side of things, because how much was that a cooperation between you guys, or was it mostly in your camp?
Well, I used Musko as like my second set of eyes. A lot of times he'd catch things and suggest things. Whenever you're working on anything graphically, it always helps to have a second set of eyes, because you're just going to miss things because you're just in the weeds of it. So that was really helpful. But I work in video production, graphic design, motion graphics. So this was right in my wheelhouse. And as soon as he had this idea years ago, I was just like, well, I can do something with this, So
were you guys friends before you started this, or just you played together, but you hang out regularly with each other? Or
we met through the Axis and Allies forums, playing G40 Global, and we got into BBR and then talking about this. But anyway, What was the question? It was about
in regards to like your artistic take on it, how much of it was on your shoulders, your inspiration, your choice of design, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I kind of just ran with ideas in the early stages, and I was throwing some PNG files over at Moscow and seeing like, hey, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? And I settled on this style it's a darker theme. It's almost like if you see the BBR map, it's like the inverse of it.
Right. Yeah,
it's the dark, scary version of BBR.
Yeah. Sure.
And I feel like it sort of gets across that feel of the grunginess, the mud, the scrapes, the rust of World War One. Being in the trenches, and
for sure.
I wanted to carry that throughout the entirety of the national objective cards, the rule book, the map, everything. And I feel like that's where I've gotten a lot of compliments, is just the overall style direction of it, because it's it definitely feels unified and like it belongs together. Because a lot of times you'll see people who come up with their own rule sets and it's just, a Word document, and not everyone does design work, and that's understandable. But I had this vision in my head of what I wanted it to look like and wanted it to feel like when you looked at everything. And I feel like I definitely got there. And that's the part I feel the most proud about. And I love designing maps, and I love maps in general. So that was the most fun part, was just coming up with the map and the style.
Sure.
That's where I started. I started with the map, and then I went from there with everything else. So as long as I'm inspired with the style, I'm like, okay, now I can keep going. So yeah.
So out of curiosity, because I know Moscow, you have an interest more, like even musically, we've talked a little bit now. Yeah, your musical interest. The other day you went to a Polish death metal band, I think you said.
I was going to.
Sorry, yeah, you were going to go to it.
I was going to this a Polish death metal, Vader.
Vader,
yeah, they're big.
So your I don't know if the right word is, but aesthetic or your personal preference of style is more on the, you described your game as, or World War One, you described kind of as almost like a hellish kind of atmosphere with the trenches and the darkness and the trench warfare, the no man's land. What about yours, Madman? What kind of aesthetic, if that's the right usage of the word, do you have? Do you have is your musical preference along that theme as well? And like, I'm just curious.
Musically, I mean, I'm pretty eclectic.
Oh yeah, okay.
I
listen like when I look at your map, it's kind of that iron, steel, or kind of that kind of look behind it, right? It's got a lot of gray, and the rule book also, the cover art is a lot of gray, and you seem to lean collectively. You guys seem heavily to lean towards the very well, and rightly so for World War One, but the dismal and the very dark side of World War One, right? So I wonder if that was a collective approach, and what are people's commentary on it? Because it's different from Axis and Allies 1914. Like even the cover art, you see a lot of characters dressed up in funny clothes and a lot of different, bling and such going on. And the map itself has a lot of multicolored stuff going on. So you seem to actively and purposefully stepped away from that color scheme of 1914.
Sure. I guess to answer that question, I wanted the map to not be a distraction, but I wanted it to feel cohesive. So I feel like, I hate to keep bringing up BBR, but the one thing BBR did with its map is it allowed the pieces to sort of tell the story of what's going on the map. Whereas with some of the older Axis and Allies maps, it's more focused on the terrain and the colors and such. And just for me, in general, I don't like too much saturation. Not that I'm saying any of those maps are too saturated. It's just oversaturation seems to like not tell the story of what's actually happening on the map. So it's not that I'm opposed to color and all of that. Like if I were to approach a different time period, like let's say the Napoleonic Wars, it'd be a very different style. It wouldn't be just a riff on what we did with Kings and Kaisers. It would be something very different.
Also the benefit of how the BBR style map looks. I've seen people complain about it because it's not the color scheme of out of box map and stuff like that. But the real benefit of it being that in that style is that it allows the pieces to pop, because as soon as you take one territory, the coloring of the territories is outdated. It's old information.
That's right.
So you allow the pieces to pop, and so when you do those games and you realize, oh shoot, I forgot to move this piece that was way over here because it blends in with the color of Brazil or something. So by having a one color, it helps prevent that from happening.
That's right.
Especially with both of our maps, and BBR and Sire Blood's BBR and our Kings and Kaisers, both of those two maps, having them be like one awesome solid color. You don't have this out, like the Roundels does that original thing for it. You don't have outdated information on the board pretty much.
And I can see that as well. Like it's one of those things that, so personally, I prefer a little bit more color. But one of the things I came to realize after reviewing your rule book as well, and I think because from our previous talk, is like you exactly said, is like the pieces that bring color to the map and the roundels and such too. That even though like the image, that PDF image or whatever of your map, it doesn't do it justice. Like how big is your board? Is it 4x8 or is it 3x7 or?
No, it's a 7 foot, 6.5 foot wide, I think.
Okay, yeah. So I think it's one of those
70
things
inches.
that it doesn't give it justice to see like a little image like this, but blow it up to something a little bit larger and throw units on it. And a lot of that gray kind of disappears underneath the color of all the pieces and the miniatures and the roundels that show up as well too. So I think, although I might be a little bit, like, why would they go for this one? I think you put it all together and then it would look really absolutely fantastic. I think so. I think you guys did a great job artistically on that department for sure. Yeah. So I think I'll have to pause here. Unless, do you guys want to continue onwards after the commercial break?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Commercial break.
Yeah,
That's right. I have no sponsor, but okay, I'll talk to you guys in a bit.
All right.
Thank you.
How often does your job call you out of bed in the middle of the night? Well, if you were a doctor, it would be often. And generally, there isn't much time to spare.
Coffee, Doctor?
Oh, fine. Have a Camel with your coffee. Thanks. You know, this night work's kind of rough, isn't it? That's right. But a Camel's always a pleasure.
Yes, folks, the pleasing mildness of a Camel is just as enjoyable to a doctor as it is to you or me. In a nationwide survey, doctors in all branches of medicine were asked, "What cigarette do you smoke, doctor?" The brand named most was Camel's. Tens of thousands of doctors, general practitioners, surgeons, specialists, doctors in every branch of medicine were included. And according to this nationwide survey, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. Try Camels yourself, the cigarette so many doctors enjoy.
All right, welcome back. So one of the things I wanted to say is that the fact that you have a graphical designer on your team, or as part of the team, one of the partners anyways, is absolutely fantastic. It's one of those things that I'm designing my own thing, and it's so hard to find somebody who's actually good at it. And not to deride any of the people I'm working with, they do a fantastic job, but you could really tell like the skill and the style that you bring to the table. So it's really cool that you have a good team of like somebody who is good with writing and another person that's good with the artistic side of things. So that's really awesome that it worked out. Yeah.
Right on. This would not be possible without Man and his skills. The fact that I was able to meet him is like find the needle in a haystack, I guess.
Right.
It was like or the I don't know, the crown jewel that fell somewhere. I don't know. I don't know what analogy I'm trying to make. But anyway, feels like blind luck that I was able to meet him, and we get along so well too. So we make a good team.
Yeah, not to toot my own horn, but I've been approached a lot ever since making this game public about like working on other games. People making maps and stuff. They're like, okay, how long would it take? I'm like, you got a year, because I got a lot of other stuff going on, and I can't really
So, I've reached out to people on the Board Game Geek website, on Fiverr, on Reddit, and I've actually hired a couple of artists to work on stuff, but their quality of workmanship was just, you could tell they're there for the paycheck and didn't really have the interest in actually making, understanding it from a board game perspective. And so I definitely appreciate when I see, that you've actually put a lot of effort into. So well done you. And if you're ever interested in working on another game, I'll put my name out there as well.
I've got like 3 in my queue right now.
I'm sure you do. Yeah. Right on.
So we do.
So I was going to ask you in regards to
on the drawing board too. So yeah.
Right. Oh yeah. Is that the Napoleonic thing that you guys are thinking about?
Oh, that's his baby.
Yeah, that's what I've been wanting to do for even before this, that I've been thinking about for years. And I just, it's something that it's so gargantuan of a task. It's not really the map itself. It's just the ideas I have are very unique. So it's just
I'd love to. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to steal ideas off of you, but sometime, because I'm creating my own series of games too. So if you ever want to just talk about stuff, it could be off camera and just share ideas and concepts of I want to do, we could totally go over
for playtesting too down the road.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So when it comes to designing, one of the things that I do is I listen to a lot of YouTube like board game conferences. There's a podcast done called Ludology that talks about board game mechanics. What about your guys' background? Did you just jump into this with both feet, or were you dabbling quite a bit beforehand as well?
Like in board game creation, would you say?
Yeah, in creating this board game.
For
instance, sorry, go on.
Oh, sorry. Well, this wasn't like technically this wasn't the first board game we made. In a way, we a very small scale by comparison predecessor to this was that back when now we're on BBR 5, right? And back when it was BBR 3, me and Madman made a very small Spanish Civil War game that was meant to be played as like you can play it as a precursor to the 1940 BBR game that could influence the outcome of Spain, and you could either have a Republican Spain and go into some alternate history route, or you have a nationalist Spain, or you can just play the games like very small. It's about you can print it out on a sheet of paper, and if you wanted to introduce somebody to the mechanics and play it in about 30 minutes, you could do that. And kind of give someone like a little. It was meant as like a teaser. And one of the things we do want to do is that we do eventually want to make a kind of what we've been calling a deluxe version of it with just a larger map that's maybe like 14 by 14 or something like that, and have more territories in it, and have it revisit that and flesh it out a little more, but basically have the same rules and whatnot. So but that was our first thing that we did, and then we decided to make this monumental task of Kings and Kaisers, and we also have like our own house rule stuff for BBR, and that'll all get fully fleshed out whenever.
Right. So aside from Axis and Allies type games, do you guys play any more games beyond that?
I do play a little bit of Memoir 44, and occasionally haven't played it as much as I would like. I also have Richard Borg's same designer, The Great War, which is tragically much like 1914, out of print, discontinued, whatever. It's now impossible to get a good copy of, or a cheap, affordable copy of it, rather. And I love that game, and I think it's criminal that it's swept under the table pretty much.
Right.
And I also like the original Shogun quite a bit, and I've gotten more people to willingly jump into that than jumping into like Axis and Allies and stuff.
Right, okay.
And then on the subject of like music and stuff, we backing up to what kind of we were saying earlier, I always find it very fun to play like thematic music while we play like historical games and stuff like that, right? So play World War II music while we play World War II games. And then historical and things like that, where it's always nice to have a good playlist while you're playing something. And while I write Kaisers, I usually listen to the 1917 soundtrack.
Nice. That's really cool.
Like that, and the new All Quiet on the Western Front too. But so it kind of helps you like get in the mood and gets you focused and stuff. And it's nice. It actually immerses you more. But I like playing those games. And then
what about you, Madman? Do you play anything else beyond the Axis and Allies kind of genre?
I wish I had time to. My list of games I want to play is way longer than the games I've ever played in my life. So like Shogun being one of them. I really do want to try Shogun.
Okay.
I have played Memoir 44 with you, Moose Cow, and once with my dad. I really like that game a lot. But other than that, all I play is with my kids. It's Candyland and Monopoly, Unicorn Monopoly. So
Unicorn Monopoly. All right.
So I don't. Needless to say, I don't really get my fix there. So
how old are your kids, Madman?
7, 4, and 1.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So I have no free time.
No. But who knows? So any of your young children, will they eventually play Axis and Allies, you think?
I can already tell my 7-year-old will not. She just doesn't have the patience. My 4-year-old, I see some potential there.
Yeah. Okay.
I can tell she's a little bit calculating and manipulative.
Cool.
So she'd be perfect for it.
Exciting.
And my 1-year-old boy, who knows? He just likes to shove food in his mouth.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, right on. No, that's really cool. So you figure this is version 1.4, correct? Of Kings and Kaisers. So I wanted to ask you guys, the name. Who came up with the name, and why did you come up with a name?
Moose
Yeah.
Town.
I came up with a name, and it was kind of simple because like when you say I've said to people who I've explained with the game to people who aren't Axis and Allies players, and when I would say Axis and Allies 1914, they'd be like, "What? That doesn't make any sense," you know?
Yeah.
So I knew right away. I'm like, that has to change because it's like there's no Axis in World War One. It just, you know,
yeah, that's true. Good point.
but Central and Allies, that doesn't have a good ring to it.
Yeah.
So I came up with it because I was thinking A and A, K and K, still kind of rhymes a little bit in that regard because people abbreviate it like that all the time. I call it K and K and K all the time when I'm like texting or something like that, right? But yeah, I was like thinking like what makes sense, what has a good ring to it. Anything else that we came up with was either something taken or was too vague, like the Great War, good game, but very vague. And you search that and a lot of stuff's going to come up. I know Cobra's he's working on the Powder Keg, which I think is a great name for a game. Also, I almost want to do a little shout out to Cobra because he and I did a little bit of corresponding a while back because I had questions about his China and so on and so forth. He gave me some nice feedback and information, which allowed me to help like set me in the right direction to kind of like research the same thing and do a different spin on it because I didn't want to copy his thing exactly. But yeah, Cobra's a real cool dude.
He is, yeah. I really like Cobra. So me and him, and I guess so. It's weird, like. Me and him have communicated a little bit about different diplomacy things. He was asking me a bunch of questions on how he could do diplomacy a little bit, and that's been kind of cool. So it's neat that we do have like this kind of a community in some sense that could talk about World War One ideas and board game world.
Yeah,
so that's cool.
Right. But yeah, basically everything else I came up with was just nothing was as good, and I eventually came up with Kings and Kaisers. And I bounced it off of him and he's like, yeah, that sounds good. And because I was like, at first I was like, oh, does that name make sense? And I'm like, no, it does, because the Kaiser of the Austria-Hungary was the king was a Kaiser as well, right? So there were two Kaisers.
So one fun fact, so my family comes from Bohemia, right? So it would be Czechoslovakia, and so I have books on the World War One, and my grandparents fought, or great grandparents fought in World War One and that kind of thing. But the Austrian emperor was called King and Kaiser. He was called King and Kaiser. He was called Kaiserlich und Königlich or something like that, right? And the Austrian army is called KUK army because it's K and K army. So it's kind of this little cool little features is like I mean, he encompasses both those styles, King and Kaiser, and it's a great name. It's a cool name because it could apply to like the German Kaisers, it could apply to like the King of England and all these other characters as well. So it really works out great. And you're absolutely right. Axis and Allies 1914. Yeah, that doesn't quite work out.
Right. Also, on the subject of names, because I think did a shout out to Cobra. I want to do a shout out also to our friend. His name is Andy Schoaf, I think is how you pronounce it. A long time ago, I posted when we were first posting Kings and Kaisers or 1914 stuff on YouTube. This guy found my channel. He lives in Germany, and he reached out to me, and I had been corresponding with him via emails and stuff, and kind of threw out the idea, and some of the ideas we had to him, and part of that incorporated a lot of change the names of the territories on the map because the original map, a lot of the territories are named after cities that are within the territory. And it doesn't make sense for the Sevastopol territory to be called Sevastopol because it's massive. So we decided is like, let's switch it all to proper regional names, especially also regional names for the time period too. So he kind of he gave me a list of like, oh, these territories should be called this, and this, and
nice.
But also I did my research to double check and fact check that as well and stuff like that. But yeah, he helped kind of give me the German stamp of approval, extra hand with just corresponding with information and ideas as well. So I just want to give a shout out to him a little bit too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. No, it's you could really see that. I really like that. I really like that kind of thematic names that are more proper. And I try to avoid myself from being like Northwestern Germany or something. I think it adds a lot more flavor if you could have the actual names, or for the rough areas at the very least, right? So that's awesome. Yeah. Good on. What was his name again? Sorry.
Andy, I think Schultz.
Andy. Okay. Yeah, I've seen him in the credits of your stuff there.
He has a thank you in the
that's right.
credits.
Same with Cobra as well. I'm really impressed with Cobra's capability. Like, he does tons of research, and I really admire his capability of his research that he puts into stuff. He puts an immense amount of work, so it's really cool to see all the effort he's done. So yeah, anyways, yeah, good stuff all around. So well done, guys. I really like what you guys have to offer. So let's talk about your technology. So one of the reasons I asked about what board games you guys play and how much you play is because one of the ways of developing games is to see if we borrow a lot from each other, right? There's a lot of board games out there, and we like borrow concepts from different things, and it happens everywhere. And honestly, at the end of the day, is like, I've come up with all kinds of interesting ideas, and I share it with people, and like, oh, I came up with the exact same thing. It's like, because everybody borrows roughly from the same pool, and the good stuff rises to the top. So what about your technology? Tell me about it. How did you come up with it? Did you borrow some ideas from somewhere else? And just tell me a little bit about it, because it's different. It's one of the interesting different things that don't represent even Axis and Allies very much.
Right. So part of it came up with because I came up with that idea originally because I got while the superpower thing of research and development and Axis and Allies, whether it's BBR or basic, kind of get sick of the superpower aspect. I've been sick of it for a while, kind of, and with the way the out-of-box rules work, it's pretty much games that only the US or whoever's making a lot of money, a little bit of Germany, they are really going to pursue it. Russia doesn't want super subs, so
that's right.
it's that problem, right? But the die rolling and getting the luck of the draw as to what you get, that was appealing to me. And a big kind of thing that factored in, like, what tech can we work with, was what technology markers were available on historical board gaming. And so I just thought, like, what can we work, what do they have available that I can work with, right? So looked at those, figured out what markers to use, and then incorporating kind of the anniversary style with having technology tokens, but making it a little bit easier to get them. And so that was the funny thing is that I'm not going to name him, but the guy who introduced me to Madman, he was one of the first guy I met on the off the Axis and Allies forum, and I introduced him to 1914, and then I gave him my I did a rough draft version, which was not super different, but overall pretty close to what it is now. And I gave him a rough draft version of it, and he looked at it and he badmouthed it really bad. He was like, "Oh, this is gonna be like Star Wars all over the map," or whatever. He just thought it was gonna be like chaos, whatever. I was like, he just badmouthed it, and like I kind of just like, okay, I'll just put it away for a while, and then I brought it back out eventually. I'm like, no, this is a good idea. What was he talking about? This is a good idea. I'm gonna make this work. So it kind of motivated me afterwards, and then I even told Madman about it, and he was actually a little bit at first apprehensive to try it until we were at the St. Louis tournament, and I had corresponded with, after meeting Ranger, Hambone's son.
Okay.
He was a 1914 fan. We told him about it a little bit after meeting him a little bit, and I sent him my technology rules the field technology rules that I haven't even played. And then he corresponded back to me how much him and his friends loved it and had fun with it. And that's really what got me the ball rolling on to do it, to try it out. And then so at the St. Louis 2 tournament, when we did a play test of this, was when Madman and I actually got to try it out ourselves. And Madman loved it immediately. And I was like, yes, validation. So much validation.
Yeah, totally. That's awesome.
So there's that. And I will say, originally it was like you trade all your technology tokens in, but they were the ones to suggest that you trade only a token, and when you get a breakthrough with that token, you roll up separately. So
absolutely
was theirs.
Yeah. So just for the viewership, the way I understand it is you buy a dice. I think you start off with a dice too. Is that correct?
Yeah. You buy each power, except for China and the faction,
the major powers.
They can't. Yeah, the major powers.
Yeah.
Anybody
so you buy a dice, and then you try to score. Is it a 5 or 6?
A 5 or 6, but you get each token. Each token gives you 2 dice.
Yeah.
So you can theoretically get 2 breakthroughs with 1 token if you roll well enough, and then you roll again, and that determines what tech you receive.
Right. Yeah. So you roll them, hoping to hit 5 or 6. You at that point, you roll them again, like you said, to get whatever tech it is, and getting that tech allows you to place certain things. It's not like in say Axis and Allies or Global War 36, where suddenly you unlock a unit and you can start building that unit. Instead, it's more territory. Is it correct to say it's more territory orientated or area orientated, that you get, this territory or this unit gets an upgrade, now it can carry machine guns with it, or
Yes.
this territory now gets sea mines and that kind of thing.
Right,
So
right.
in generally, it doesn't unlock a new production thing that you can produce. It essentially is like a one-time buff, not a one-time buff, but it basically buffs a couple units on the board or a territory on the board to be a
Right.
little bit better. And
Right.
so yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah, that's about it. So just real quick, it's like it's improved naval mines, which rolls 2 dice against each ship as opposed to just 1. They still roll at 1. Minefields, which basically act kind of as like a AAA against attacking infantry or land units. And then poison gas, which you can pair with an artillery unit to paralyze pair with up to 3 artillery units to paralyze defending infantry, only defending infantry. You can do machine guns, which boost up to which 1 machine gun can boost up to 3 infantry in offense or defense. So you can have 3 infantry in a territory defending at 4, which is pretty cool, or attacking at 3 if you don't, and if you don't have to have artillery paired with them to get them to attack with 3. 1 machine gun boosts up to 3, and you can only keep one technology per power in a territory. So you can't have like Britain can't have a stack of 5 machine guns in 1 territory, so it prevents things from being overpowered. And then you have trench works, which are defense, defend up to absorb up to 3 hits defensively. And then you have your a selection. If you roll a 6, you get a choice, a naval port or a military base, and those can help spawn or mobilize rather select units in other territories that you control, original territories. So so if Germany gets them, they can gets one of them. The idea is that why they can't put those in a conquered territory is, well, it doesn't make any sense that Germans are rising up in in a Russian territory or whatever, so you have to mobilize people who would be
willing to fight on your side,
willing to fight for you anyway, so things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's great. I really like it. It's something that really makes it stand out in your game as a unique kind of mechanic that really stands out in a really lovely way. I think is quite good. Yeah. So if a person was to buy the game, it does list the components and everything that comes with it. Let's see. I wanted to talk about. I know we're running out of time, so I don't want to talk too much here. But let's talk about your plans for the future, because you were talking earlier about, or maybe in a previous time, about expansions that you might kind of include, that you slot into. You could play expansions, and then talk a little bit about where people can access your game now as well, where they can purchase it and kind of something along those lines.
Combat hand to that.
Yeah, Combat Miniatures is who is holding it right now. And the unfortunate thing is that it's not a boxed game. So if you're looking to do like an all-in-one buy, at this time can't offer that, because it's just we're just starting. But some of the components, like the trackers, the battle boards, the maps, the card decks, they're all produced from different vendors. So they're coming from different places, so to speak. But Combat Miniatures has everything. It has the map, it has the victory point and income tracker, has the battle board, the card deck, and the rulebook, and it also has the digital download portal if you would like to have digital versions of those if you want to save money. And we do offer the rule book for free for anybody who wants a rule book. So just the digital version.
The digital file version.
Yeah. So that's where it is right now. And in terms of plans for the near future, I'll speak for the near future. I have ideas in my head for the long term, but let's speak for the near future. It's just, we want to get more games in. I think the best way to make this game even better and tweak things and whatnot is just get more games and more YouTube games, public games, more private games, get more people playing the game. And for the people who have played it so far, they've loved it. And it's just getting people to try it, because people seem to can sometimes be entrenched in the games that they usually play. But once they've tried it, it seems they just absolutely love it. And it's a very enjoyable experience. It's not, it can be tense, but it's not to the point where you're so stressed out after the game. You know,
Yeah.
it's just fun all the way through. It's just a fun game.
I find 1914 in Kings and Kaisers, the whole like one round of combat, I find that very enjoyable, relaxing. I get way less stressed playing that because, it's ultimately it's going to come down to the dice, right? And you might get diced, but not in a horrible way, right? And just the way that everything moves.
Can I add on to that briefly too? Just since it's limited to one round of combat, it's not like in Axis and Allies 1914 where it's like, oh man, I miscalculated, I didn't realize you can hit me there, and your entire army gets wiped out, and it takes you 3 turns to kind of rebuild to a position where you can combat your enemy. In Axis and Allies and this game as well, like Kings and Kaisers, it's like, okay, you may have miscalculated, you may lose a round of combat, but at the end of the day, it's not going to be catastrophic unless you like seriously miscalculated, right? So I agree. I find it relaxing and much more enjoyable, I find, in some sense.
Yeah. It's I don't know. It doesn't have a I don't get the headache that I can't possibly have with other games, I feel like. I find it a lot more fun. I mean, still fun. Both of I like the original games are great, but I think once you wrap your head around 1914 and the Kings and Kaisers, or what, once you wrap your head around it, it's a lot of fun. It's great, and I love chucking those micro dice. That in the original game. I have some color coded dice myself. Madman hopes to eventually make.
Yeah, I actually wanted to touch on that actually. Another question that's been brought up a lot with me too is pieces for the game, because since the 1914 is out of print, but it is coming back. Everybody's been asking about pieces. I do make the pieces. I do 3D print them in color, but I only have one printer. So I have a lot of people waiting on entire piece sets right now, and I don't make any profit from it. I just charge what it costs me to do it, honestly. So that's why I can't be working 8 hours a day.
Andy hasn't been able to print because it's been so cold for so long.
So I don't have a temperature controlled garage. So the winter I've just had to basically retire from 3D printing until it gets warm out again. So,
So a couple questions in that regard. So I know we've talked about printing before, and one thing that you've mentioned before. Okay, one of the things that I find with 3D print is sometimes you get really non-malleable plastic, and we've talked about this before, saying that the choice of plastic you have is much more malleable than you'd get from other vendors as well, so they have more flex as opposed to some other stuff that would just simply snap. Another one is that you're doing it in colored plastic, so in the sense that you don't have to paint your miniatures. Like oftentimes they'll print in like a certain white or whatever. In your case, you're getting colored plastic to print it, so you don't have to paint your pieces, which is another point to refer to. A question I wanted to ask you as well is, if people are asking you so much about miniatures and if you get pieces for it, would you consider selling the files for?
Oh yeah. And actually I'm in the process of readying those files to be available on Combat Miniatures. That is a goal. I am working away at the expanded unit set, those 3D files as well. So it's just going to be a matter of finding the right formats and making sure the files are clean and everything. And, I absolutely want to make those available for sure. And
so go on.
I was just going to speak more on the pieces in general. I mean, I would love to be able to be mass producing these and make them all available to everybody. I mean, that's what I would love to do, but it's just, I've got one printer. So if anybody's listening who is willing to take on this project, I will hand it to you. I'll give you the files. Be the production arm of this team.
And also just to kind of expand on the expansions thing I mentioned earlier, we don't want to be doing like, we want people to be able to get the Kings and Kaisers map and not have to worry about a map upgrade, so not about like, in 1 or 2 years have to buy the whole thing over again or whatever, so with any new rules or whatever that we come up with in the future, I don't want to like incorporate that. I don't want to have to like force people to like, okay, this is a new version of the game, more things, et cetera, right? So basically the way to kind of do that without twisting people's arms into having to do that or having to upgrade whatever before we get to that point where theoretically later on down the road, let's say there's a Kings and Kaisers 2.0 or whatever, right? Instead of doing that, making expansion, if people want more rules, because this is also like, it's expanded Kings and Kaisers, sorry, expanded 1914, but it's expanded 1914, and original 1914 isn't a lot of rules, but we are throwing a lot already at a person to have to learn, right? And if once they learn those rules, they have the base game. If they want more after that, you know, then there's the idea we have of like making expansions that a player can choose to incorporate those. So like one idea I have is like, if we wanted to flesh out Russian Civil War even more, because right now, like the whites don't have any national objectives. The Soviets have one, and that's it, right? But theoretically, like if later on down the road we did like a Russian Civil War expansion to add more national objectives and other things, you know, that could be its own standalone expansion that people can choose to incorporate into it, or other things in the game and stuff like that. And also the you know, additional units. You know, if we come up with good rules for additional units later on down the road, that can happen, but they shouldn't be. People shouldn't be forced to include those into the game, and that's also kind of why we have units in the first place. Like I love the Zeppelins, but they're not out of box pieces, and I got the HPG 3D printed ones, but you got to paint them, you know. And I live in an apartment, so it's not easy for me to like be spray painting all the time.
Fair enough.
And a lot of other people are like that too, you know. Like I have painted pieces. I hate having to paint pieces. But I also
that's right.
I want to have the right pieces too. You know?
That's right.
So I don't want to force people to. I don't want to force people to have to deal with even more work, you know, or things like that. If they have to deal with it, it's I guess if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that makes sense too. Is like, so down the track there might be a 2.0 for Kings and Kaisers. In the meantime, what you might do to kind of flesh out the game in certain aspects that might need fleshing out, or as optional things for people that want a little bit more flavor in their game, you'll release expansions, and later on you might fold them into 2.0. But in the meantime, people can kind of choose that box off, that that expansion to play around with, so that they can get with other people who have the same setup. So yeah, that sounds like a really tidy solution to your problems there. Now, one last thing before we let you guys go on.
We don't want to be doing a 2.0 anytime soon, just to clarify that. We don't want to be doing a 2.0 anytime soon. We don't want people to have to upgrade their game that they just got, you know, kind of thing.
Totally, absolutely. Yeah. So if a person, so as one final thing, what do people at the very minimum need to play this game with? And that way people who are listening to this, and if they're interested in this game, they will look at what they have available, look at what they need to acquire, and then they could jump in and start playing it.
Well, if you want the 3D printed pieces, you talk to Rick. If you want to use the 1914 out of box pieces, I'd recommend, even with the reissue, I would recommend 2 sets of those, even with the reissue. You're going to need cavalry pieces, and you can get most of those from either HPG or various Risk games have like close enough colors. Like my Risk pieces I use for the Soviets, for the Ottomans. I use the HPG has blue cavalry that you could use for France, but I like the Risk ones for France more. Things like that. The only cavalry I've had to paint, which I just used HPG's pieces, the only cavalry I've had to paint are for Empire of China purple and the US.
So at a minimum, what a person needs is something like 2 Axis and Allies 1914 setups, and maybe what might be beneficial for them for at least some of the extra Chinese pieces, maybe a 1940 setup. Some of them could be spray painted, or some person could be like the Soviets or this color, this. And then for cavalry pieces, perhaps a game of Risk might just do it. And that way you get things at a very nice budget. And then of course you need to get your tracker and then the map, and these you could find from Combat Miniature.
We actually have a page. We actually have a page in the rule book that tells you exactly what you need. So it's a game components page. So to get started,
I've read that as well.
Yeah, you need the pieces. You need the Sorry,
real quick, I just interject. On my YouTube channel, I did make some videos showing off the pieces that I have, pretty much, or what you would need, etc., etc. I'll probably do a new one at some point soon too, just to go over what specific things you need and stuff. And then like most of the things can, you know, if you don't want to paint, if you don't want the 3D printed pieces, you can acquire a lot of them through historical board gaming. I use the red pieces for Russia, other than the Risk Cavalry. Those are from historical board gaming. For Japan, there's I like to use the gold and yellow pieces that they have, even if they're World War II. It's just that's the easiest route to go with, pretty much.
Yeah.
Also cavalry from Risk as well for Japan, and that's pretty much it. And then like a few pieces, a few pieces I had personally I had to paint some, and I have I think I have a painting guide, or I'll make another one or whatever in terms of exactly what colors I used. Not necessarily that's what you have to go down the road with. I'm not a fan. Like I said, I only painted what I had to. That's it. Yeah.
Right on. Okay. Well, guys, so thank you very much for this podcast. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I know, Man, you got to take off here in a moment. So I'll put a link to your descriptions in the... You got it. Okay. I'll put a link to your YouTube channels in the description below, and people, if they want to check it out, they absolutely can. And yeah, and then I look forward to doing a YouTube board with you guys sometime in the future.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Looking forward to it as well, Jinx. Thanks so much for hosting.
Well, my
Yeah,
pleasure.
and if anybody wants to reach out to us directly about the game, it's grandcommandgaming@gmail.com. So
Excellent.
I also have an email, moosecowhq@gmail. So if someone wants questions, bounce ideas off, just talk, whatever, feel free to reach out. Yeah.
I'll put that in the description below as well too, and then if I'm missing anything, we'll throw it in a comment or something like that too. So talk to you guys later. Thanks for coming on board.
take care.
Cheers. Bye.
Later.